If someone had told me that one dinner could destroy my engagement, expose years of lies, and completely change my future, I would have laughed. Not the polite little laugh you give strangers. The kind that escapes when life feels safe. The kind I hadn't made in a very long time. My name is Charlotte Bennett. I'm 35 years old. I grew up in Seattle, Washington. People who meet me for the first time usually notice the same things. I'm 5'7", brown hair, blue eyes. The type of smile people say makes them feel comfortable. I've never known if they're telling the truth or simply being kind. Either way, I've always preferred people to notice my heart before they notice anything else. My father taught me that. He used to say, money tells people what you own. Character tells them who you are. I believed him. I still do. But his lesson would be tested in a way neither of us could have imagined. Because one Friday night, one single sentence, changed everything. She's obviously after your money. Those words floated across a perfectly decorated dining room. Crystal glasses, silver candles, fresh roses, expensive wine, and 24 people who suddenly became very interested in my reaction. Nobody spoke. Nobody defended me, even my fiancé, the man who promised he would always stand beside me, stayed silent. That silence hurt far more than the accusation. I smiled, not because I was happy. Because I refused to let strangers watch me break. If only they had known the truth. If only they had known who I really was. The room would have gone silent for a very different reason. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why that dinner mattered, you need to understand how I got there. Welcome back to Inspired Real Events, where ordinary people meet impossible family and the quiet ones learn the loudest lessons. If betrayal, gratitude, and slow burn justice are your thing, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe. 3 years earlier, rain covered downtown Seattle, not the dramatic movie kind, just that soft drizzle locals barely notice. I had just finished a 16-hour shift at Children's Mercy Medical Center. My shoulders ached. My stomach growled loud enough to embarrass me. I looked like someone who had survived a tornado. Hair tied into a messy bun, no makeup. Hospital scrubs hidden beneath a long gray coat. I wanted exactly 2 things, coffee and sleep, instead. Life introduced me to Ethan Walker. He literally crashed into me outside a coffee shop. My latte exploded. Coffee splashed across both of us. He stared at his soaked white shirt, then looked at me. Oh no, I blinked. I'm so sorry. He looked horrified. I wasn't watching where I was going. I couldn't help it. I laughed, a real laugh. You know, I said while holding up my now empty cup, I think my coffee was having a rough day anyway. He laughed too. I'm Ethan. Charlotte. I owe you another coffee. You owe me an entire gallon. He grinned. I think I can afford that. That should have been my first clue, not because he mentioned money, because he looked embarrassed after saying it, almost as if he wished he hadn't. An hour later, we were still talking about books, travel, dogs, favorite movies, our worst cooking disasters. He admitted he'd once nearly burned down his apartment trying to make grilled cheese. I laughed until tears filled my eyes. You are exaggerating. I absolutely am not. The fire department came. They did. They actually came. They asked me not to cook again. I laughed harder. People in the cafe started looking at us. Neither of us cared for the first time in months. My heart felt light. Dadding Ethan felt easy, comfortable, safe. He never acted impressed by expensive things. He loved food trucks, road trips, watching terrible horror movies just so we could make fun of them afterward. One Saturday, we drove 3 hours just to eat pie from a tiny roadside diner someone recommended online. The pie wasn't even good. He took one bite, made the most dramatic face imaginable. This, he announced, is an insult to blueberries. I nearly choked laughing. He looked ridiculous. I loved that. There wasn't a single moment where I felt I needed to pretend. I didn't wear designer clothes. I drove my old Honda Accord. I rented a modest apartment. I almost never mentioned work, not because I wanted to hide it, because I genuinely hated talking about myself. Being a pediatric surgeon wasn't something I considered impressive. It was simply my job. The children deserved attention, not me. Whenever Ethan asked about work, I'd smile. It was busy. Were the kids okay? Most of them. I bet they love you. I hope they feel safe. That was enough. He never pushed. 6 months into dadding, he invited me to meet his parents. I should warn you. He rubbed the back of his neck. My mom can be. He searched for the right word. Opinionated. I smiled. My grandmother once threw mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving. He blinked. Seriously. She said they were underseasoned. He laughed. I already like your family. Oh, don't. They're terrifying. The Walker estate stood behind enormous iron gates, not a house, a mansion. The kind you only see in magazines, perfect gardens, luxury cars, stone fountains. I actually checked the address twice. Ethan, I know. This is your parents' house, he nodded. My dad owns Walker Development. The name hit me immediately. One of the biggest real estate companies in the Pacific Northwest. Suddenly, pieces started fitting together, the expensive watches, business dinners, last-minute meetings. He'd never bragged, never once, he simply never mentioned it. Inside, everything sparkled. The floors, the chandeliers, even the air somehow looked expensive. A woman stepped toward us. Perfect blonde hair, perfect diamonds, perfect smile, the kind that disappears before reaching the eyes. Welcome, she hugged Ethan, then turned toward me. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, not rudely, professionally, like an appraiser evaluating furniture. So, she said, you're Charlotte. I am, she smiled again. Oh, nothing more, but somehow, that tiny word carried an entire conversation. Not impressive, not what I expected. This will be interesting. Dinner was beautiful, technically, emotionally. It felt like taking an exam without knowing the questions. So Charlotte, his father asked, what do you do? I work at the hospital. Oh, a nurse, no. I help with pediatric surgery. Before I could continue, his mother interrupted. Healthcare workers are wonderful. Then immediately changed the subject, I noticed, but ignored it. Later, she asked about my apartment, my parents, my college. My student loans. Questions wrapped inside pleasant smiles. Every answer seemed to disappoint her. Finally, she asked, so your family isn't wealthy? I smiled politely. We're comfortable. Comfortable, not rich, not poor, simply comfortable. She nodded slowly. I see. Again, just 3 words, but somehow, they landed like stones. Driving home, Ethan squeezed my hand. I'm sorry. For what? My mom. She wasn't exactly welcoming. He sighed. She'll come around. I smiled. I hope so. But something deep inside me whispered otherwise. Sometimes. Women recognize other women faster than men ever can. She hadn't disliked me, not yet. She had simply decided I wasn't enough, and she intended to prove it. I looked out the window as Seattle's lights blurred in the rain. I had no idea. That was only the beginning, because 2 years later, at our engagement dinner, in front of everyone she loved, she would smile sweetly, raise her wine glass, look directly into my eyes, and call me a gold digger. She believed those words would humiliate me. Instead, they uncovered a secret that would leave her own family speechless, and by the end of that unforgettable night, the only person begging for forgiveness wouldn't be me. For the next 2 years, I kept telling myself the same thing. She'll warm up eventually. People always say first impressions aren't everything. Maybe that's true. But some people make up their minds in the first 30 seconds and spend years looking for evidence that they were right. That was Ethan's mother, Victoria Walker. Beautiful, elegant, always perfectly dressed, always smiling. And somehow every compliment she gave felt like an insult wrapped in silk. If she looked at your dress and said, "That's adorable," you immediately wanted to check if there was a stain on it. She had mastered the art of making people feel small without ever raising her voice. I tried to believe she just needed time. Instead, every family gathering became another test I never realized I was taking. The first Thanksgiving after Ethan and I started dating should have been fun. The Walker family invited nearly 30 relatives. The dining room looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal glasses, golden candles. A turkey so perfectly roasted it almost looked fake. I offered to help in the kitchen. Victoria smiled. Oh, sweetheart, don't worry. I've got professionals handling dinner. Professionals. She emphasized the word just enough for me to hear it. I stepped back with a smile. No problem. A few minutes later, Ethan's cousin Mia whispered beside me, "Don't take it personally." I looked at her. "She lets almost nobody help." Mia leaned a little closer. "Actually," she laughed under her breath, "she doesn't let anyone help unless they're family." I smiled politely. The words stung more than I wanted to admit, because after almost a year together, I still wasn't considered family. Things became stranger over time. Victoria never insulted me directly. Instead, she planted tiny seeds. One afternoon, she admired my handbag. "That's cute. Thank you. I remember having one like that in college." She paused. "Of course, mine wasn't imitation leather." She took a sip of tea as though she hadn't said anything unusual. I looked down at my bag. It wasn't imitation leather. It was handmade by a local artisan I'd met during a charity fundraiser. I almost corrected her, then stopped. Why? Because I realized something. She wasn't interested in the truth. She only wanted me to defend myself, and I refused to play her game. Ethan noticed some of it, not all of it. His father noticed almost nothing. Richard Walker was a workaholic, kind, respectful, always exhausted. He spent more time building skyscrapers than paying attention to what happened inside his own home. If Victoria smiled, he assumed everyone else was smiling too. One Sunday afternoon, Ethan and I were invited to brunch. Victoria had invited another guest, a young woman named Amanda, tall, blonde, designer clothes from head to toe. She greeted Ethan with a hug that lasted just a little too long. "Oh my gosh, I haven't seen you forever," Victoria beamed. "You two practically grew up together," Amanda laughed. "We were almost engaged in kindergarten." Everyone laughed, except me, not because I was jealous, because Victoria looked at Amanda the way she'd never looked at me, like she had already imagined the wedding. Grandchildren, the family Christmas cards. Amanda turned toward me. "So what do you do?" "I work at a children's hospital." "Oh," she smiled. "Administrative," I shook my head. "No, I work in surgery." Before she could ask another question, Victoria interrupted. "Charlotte is very modest." Then she quickly asked Amanda about her luxury vacation in Italy. The conversation moved on again. It happened so often that I started counting. Every time someone asked me about my career, Victoria found a way to change the subject. At first, I thought it was coincidence. By the 10th time, I knew it wasn't. One evening, Ethan asked me something that caught me completely off guard. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why don't you ever tell my family exactly what you do?" I looked at him. "What do you mean? You always say you work at the hospital." "Well, I do," he smiled. "You know what I mean." I laughed softly. "I've never liked introducing myself by my job." "But you're one of the best pediatric surgeons in Seattle." I shrugged. "That's just work." He stared at me for a second. "I love that about you." "What?" "You never lead with your accomplishments." I smiled. "My dad used to tell me something." "What?" "If people only respect you after hearing your resume, they never respected you." Ethan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I wish everyone thought like that." "So do I." Neither of us realized. Someone else had been listening. Victoria, standing just outside the dining room. She hadn't heard everything, only enough. "People only respect you." "Never respected you." Her face hardened. She walked away before we noticed her. Later, I discover she misunderstood the conversation completely. She thought I believed I deserved the Walker fortune. She couldn't have been more wrong. A month later, something happened that made me uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Victoria invited me shopping, just the two of us. I almost declined. Instead, I told myself this was progress. Maybe she wanted to know me better. Maybe she'd finally accepted me. We spent nearly 3 hours walking through luxury boutiques. She pointed at handbags worth more than my first car, jewelry displayed behind locked glass, shoes with price tags that made me blink twice. Finally, she asked, "So, what kind of engagement ring are you expecting?" I laughed. "I don't really care." She looked surprised. "You don't?" "No. I'd honestly be happy with something simple." She tilted her head. "Really?" "Of course. What if Ethan bought you a $2 million diamond?" I smiled. "I'd probably ask him to return it." She stared. "I'm serious. I'd rather spend that money opening another children's clinic." She didn't answer. Instead, she smiled, a strange smile, one I'd later recognize. It was the smile she wore whenever she thought someone had lied to her. That evening, she called Amanda. "I don't believe her." Amanda laughed. "About what?" "She says she doesn't care about money." "And," Victoria looked out the window, "no woman turns down $2 million. Amanda shrugged. "Maybe she's different." Victoria smiled coldly. "No, she's smarter than that. She's pretending." That sentence became her truth, not because she had evidence, because it fit the story she wanted to believe. Meanwhile, my own life kept moving. The hospital became busier than ever. Some weeks I worked 80 hours. One little boy named Noah stayed in intensive care for almost 3 months. Every morning before surgery, he'd ask me the same question. "Am I gonna be okay?" Every morning, I'd kneel beside his bed, smile, and say, "We're going to fight together." The day he finally walked out of the hospital, his mother hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. She whispered through tears, "You gave my son his life back." I cried all the way to my car that evening. Moments like that reminded me why I chose this career. Not for recognition, not for money, not for titles, for hope. When I told Ethan about Noah, he listened quietly, then kissed my forehead. "I don't know how you do it. I don't always know either. You save lives." "I just help," he smiled. "That's exactly why you save them." 3 weeks later, on a quiet Saturday morning, Ethan invited me to the place where we'd spilled coffee on each other 3 years earlier. The same little cafe, the same corner table, the same rain outside. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stopped. "Charlotte Bennett," his voice shook. "I've loved you from the moment you laughed instead of getting angry." A tear rolled down my cheek. "I've watched you give everything you have to complete strangers. I've never met anyone with a kinder heart." He opened the box. Inside was a beautiful diamond ring. Elegant, simple, perfect. "Will you marry me?" I couldn't even speak. I laughed through tears, covered my mouth. Finally, I nodded. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." People inside the cafe started clapping. A little girl squealed. Someone shouted. She said yes. I threw my arms around him. For a few beautiful minutes, life felt absolutely perfect. I had no idea that less than 48 hours later, Victoria Walker would quietly begin planning an engagement dinner, not to celebrate our future, but to expose the woman she believed had trapped her son. She was convinced that one carefully planned evening would prove to everyone that I was nothing more than a gold digger. Instead, she was about to destroy the perfect image she'd spent decades building. The morning after Ethan proposed, I woke up before sunrise. For a few seconds, I forgot everything. Then I looked at my left hand. The ring caught the first rays of sunlight coming through my bedroom window. I couldn't stop smiling. I wasn't smiling because of the diamond. I was smiling because of what it represented. A promise, a future, a partner. I reached for my phone. There were over 80 unread messages. Friends, coworkers, college classmates, even nurses who had worked overnight had somehow heard the news. One message made me laugh. It was from Dr. Melissa Chen, the head of pediatric surgery. Finally, I was beginning to think Ethan would need another 5 years. I laughed out loud. She wasn't wrong. Ethan had spent months trying to find the perfect moment. If he had waited any longer, I probably would have proposed to him myself. At the hospital that Monday, everyone wanted to see the ring. Nurses surrounded me at the nurses' station. "Oh my gosh, Charlotte, it's beautiful. Let me see." One nurse gently held my hand. "This is gorgeous." I smiled. "It's perfect." Dr. Chen walked over carrying 2 coffees. "So, when's the wedding?" I laughed. "We haven't even picked a date." "Good." She handed me a coffee. "Because I'm not approving vacation time during flu season." Everyone burst into laughter. The tension of another busy week disappeared for a moment. Then the overhead speaker interrupted us. "Trauma Team 3 to Operating Room 2. The laughter stopped instantly. Coffee cups were set down. Everyone moved. Within seconds, we were back to saving lives. That's how hospitals work. Joy and heartbreak often share the same hallway. That evening, Ethan called. "My parents want to host an engagement dinner." "That's nice." I meant it. Maybe this was the fresh start we needed. "When?" "Next Saturday." "So soon." "My mom says family shouldn't wait to celebrate." I smiled. "Then let's celebrate." There was a brief silence. "You sure? Of course. You know how she is." "I do. But maybe this time will be different." Ethan sighed softly. "I hope you're right." So did I. I wanted peace. Not because I needed Victoria's approval, because I loved Ethan. And loving someone means hopping the people they love can one day love you too. 3 days later, Victoria called me directly. It was the first time she'd ever phoned me without Ethan. "Charlotte." "Hi, Victoria. I wanted to discuss Saturday." "Of course. It's a formal dinner." "No problem. I'll send you the dress code." "Perfect." She paused. "Oh, one more thing. Yes, I've invited several business partners." "Okay. It would probably be best if you didn't discuss financial matters." I frowned. "I'm sorry. I simply don't want anyone feeling uncomfortable." I wasn't planning to discuss finances. "I'm sure you weren't," she laughed lightly. "I just thought I'd mention it." The call ended. I stared at my phone. Something about that conversation didn't feel right. I couldn't explain why, but it felt like someone had just warned me about a game, without telling me the rules. Meanwhile, Victoria was very busy, not planning a celebration, planning a performance. She sat in her study with a leather notebook open in front of her. On one page, she'd written my name. Underneath it, questions. Where did Charlotte grow up? What does her family own? How much student debt does she have? Why doesn't she wear designer brands? Why does she drive an old Honda? Why hasn't she bought a house? To anyone else, they looked like innocent observations. To Victoria, they were evidence. Evidence of a story she'd already decided was true. She looked up as Amanda walked into the room. "So," Amanda asked. "What's the plan?" Victoria smiled. "I'm simply going to ask questions." Amanda frowned. "That's it." People reveal themselves. She closed the notebook. "You'd be amazed what happens when someone gets comfortable." Amanda wasn't convinced. "What if you're wrong?" Victoria looked almost offended. "I've never been wrong about people." Richard Walker walked in just as Amanda left. He noticed the notebook. Planning something? The engagement dinner, he smiled. I'm glad. I want Charlotte to feel welcomed. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Oh, she'll remember this dinner. Richard laughed. I'm sure she will. He kissed his wife on the forehead before leaving. He had no idea what she meant. On Friday afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house. My mother hugged me before I even reached the front door. Let me see the ring again, I laughed. You've already seen it 5 times. I know, but now it's 6. Dad was outside trimming roses. He looked up. There she is. He hugged me tightly. You look happy. I am. He noticed something. What is it? What? You're smiling. But your eyes look tired. Leave it to my father. He'd always been able to read me. I sat beside him on the porch. I think Ethan's mom still doesn't like me. He nodded slowly. I figured. Was it that obvious? I've met people like her. He put the gardening shears down. They don't judge your heart. They judge your packaging. I laughed quietly. You always make everything sound simple. Because it usually is. He looked toward the sunset. Charlotte. Never try to convince someone to value you. If they need proof, they've already missed the point. I leaned my head against his shoulder. I just don't want Ethan caught in the middle. He won't be, Dad smiled. The truth has a funny way of introducing itself. I didn't know how right he was. Saturday finally arrived. The engagement dinner. I spent almost an hour deciding what to wear. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, because I wanted to respect the occasion. I chose a navy blue evening gown. Simple, elegant, no flashy jewelry, just pearl earrings my grandmother had given me before she passed away. As I fastened them, I smiled. They're lucky earrings. Grandma used to say they reminded her that true beauty didn't sparkle, it stayed. Ethan arrived exactly at 6. The moment I opened the door, he froze. Wow, I laughed. What? You? He shook his head. I don't deserve this. I smiled. Good answer. He kissed my forehead. You look incredible. So do you. He looked nervous, more nervous than he had while proposing. You okay? He forced a smile. I think so. I reached for his hand. We'll get through tonight together. He squeezed my fingers. I love you. I love you too. As we drove toward the Walker estate, rain began falling again. Seattle seemed to save its rain for important moments. The windshield wipers moved back and forth. Neither of us spoke much. Soft music filled the silence. When the mansion finally appeared behind its iron gates, my stomach tightened. Dozens of luxury cars already lined the driveway. This is bigger than I expected, Ethan sighed. My mom invited more people than she told me. How many? I honestly don't know. That wasn't comforting. Inside, everything looked breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Waiters carried silver trays filled with champagne. Nearly 50 guests filled the ballroom. Business executives, family friends, relatives, local politicians, television personalities. It looked less like an engagement dinner and more like a corporate gala. Victoria greeted us with the perfect smile. There you are. She hugged Ethan warmly, then turned toward me. You look lovely, Charlotte. Thank you. I do hope you're comfortable. I am. Wonderful. She glanced around the room. There are several important people here tonight. I'll introduce you when the time is right. Something about the way she emphasized important made my stomach tighten again. Across the room, Amanda stood beside the champagne table, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not smug, not happy, almost concerned. She caught my eye for a second, then quickly looked away. That was strange, very strange. A waiter offered me a glass of champagne. I accepted with a smile. As I lifted the glass, I noticed Victoria watching me from across the room. Not casually, carefully, almost as if she were waiting for the evening to begin. I had no idea that hidden behind her warm smile was a carefully rehearsed plan. Every guest had been seated exactly where she wanted. Every conversation had been guided exactly where she wanted. Every question she'd ask me tonight had already been written in the notebook sitting in her bedroom. She believed she was about to expose me. She never imagined the person whose secrets would be exposed. Be herself. The ballroom glittered beneath 3 enormous crystal chandeliers. Soft piano music drifted through the room. Servers moved gracefully between guests, balancing silver trays topped with champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Every conversation sounded polished. Every laugh felt practiced. It was the kind of evening where everyone seemed to know exactly how to behave. Everyone except me. I stood beside Ethan, smiling politely as he introduced me to one executive after another. This is Charlotte. So nice to meet you. Congratulations. What do you do? Before I could answer, Victoria appeared beside us as if she'd been waiting. Charlotte works in healthcare. Then she'd smoothly redirect the conversation. But enough about work, tell us about your latest project. The subject changed, again and again. By the fifth interruption, I knew it wasn't an accident. Someone didn't want these people knowing what I actually did. I couldn't understand why. One man in his 60s extended his hand. Arthur Reynolds. His handshake was firm but warm. I've heard wonderful things about you. I smiled politely. I'm afraid you've heard more than I deserve. He laughed. Humility is rare. Before he could ask another question, Victoria gently touched his arm. Arthur, Richard was looking for you. Oh, something about the downtown project. Arthur excused himself. As he walked away, he glanced back at me with a curious expression, almost as though he'd wanted to continue our conversation. I leaned toward Ethan. Has your mom always done that? He frowned. Done what? Change the subject every time someone asks about my work. He looked genuinely confused. I never noticed. I smiled gently. It's okay. But it wasn't okay, not really, because once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. Dinner was announced. 50 guests slowly found their assigned seats. Elegant place cards rested beside each plate. I looked for mine, then blinked. I was seated nearly halfway down the table, far away from Ethan, far away from Richard, right beside Amanda. Ethan frowned immediately. There must be a mistake. Victoria smiled pleasantly. No mistake. She placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. I need you beside your father. It'll only be for dinner. We'll all mingle afterward. For a brief second, I thought Ethan might argue. Instead, he looked at me. Are you okay? I nodded. It's only dinner. He smiled apologetically. I'll come find you afterward. I watched him walk toward the head of the table. A strange feeling settled into my chest. This wasn't random. Nothing tonight felt random. Amanda took the seat beside me. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she sighed. I should probably apologize. I looked over. For what? My aunt, I blinked. Your aunt, she smiled faintly. Victoria. I know she isn't actually my aunt, but she's been like family since I was little. I nodded. You don't have to apologize for someone else. I know, she hesitated. She lowered her voice. I don't think tonight is going to be what you expect. My heartbeat slowed. What do you mean? She looked toward the head of the table. I don't know exactly, but she's been planning something. I stared at her. Planning what? Amanda shook her head. I wish I knew. Before I could ask anything else, Victoria stood. She tapped her champagne glass gently with a silver spoon. The room became quiet. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Her smile was flawless. Family, friends, business partners. It means the world to Richard and me that you're here to celebrate Ethan's engagement. Polite applause filled the room. She continued, as parents, we all dream about the day our children find the right person. She looked toward Ethan. We want someone who loves them. Another pause, protects them. Another pause, and values them. She emphasized the last word just enough for me to notice. For who they are. A few guests nodded. It sounded like a perfectly normal speech, but something underneath it didn't. Dinner was served. Conversations slowly returned. Amanda barely touched her food. Neither did I across the table. I noticed Victoria speaking quietly with two older women. Both of them glanced toward me. One whispered something. The other frowned. A minute later, another guest looked at me. Then another. My skin prickled. People weren't just looking. They were evaluating. As if someone had already told them a story about me, the first course ended. Victoria stood again. I thought it might be fun. She smiled warmly. To get to know our future daughter-in-law a little better. Several guests laughed politely. I forced a smile. Charlotte, she looked directly at me. Would you mind answering a few questions? The room became quiet. I didn't want to make a scene. Of course, she smiled. Wonderful. So, where did you grow up? Seattle. And your parents? My father owns a small landscaping company. My mother teaches music. That's lovely, she nodded. And where did you go to college? University of Washington. Scholarship, mostly. Oh, another little smile. And after graduation, medical school. A few eyebrows lifted. Victoria continued before anyone could react. Medical school can be expensive. It can. Did your parents help? A little. I also worked. And loans? Some. She nodded thoughtfully. So you still have debt? I do. The room stayed quiet. I couldn't understand why these questions mattered. She lifted her wine glass. Nothing wrong with that. Most young people have debt. She smiled at the guests. It's just part of understanding someone's journey. Several people nodded. It sounded harmless, but I felt as though invisible pieces were being placed onto a chessboard. Another question. So, do you own your home? No. You rent? Yes. And your car? It's older, she smiled. I've seen it. It has character. A few people chuckled. I laughed too. It definitely does. My mechanic says it deserves a retirement party. This time the laughter sounded genuine. Even Richard laughed for a brief moment. The tension disappeared. Victoria noticed. Her smile tightened. That wasn't the reaction she'd wanted. She changed direction. Charlotte, when Ethan proposed, were you surprised? Very. Did you expect the ring to be that large? I looked down at my hand. I didn't think about the size. You didn't? No, I was paying attention to the man holding it. Several women smiled. Someone quietly said, "That's sweet." Victoria's expression barely changed, but I saw something flash behind her eyes, frustration. She wasn't finding cracks. She was finding walls. Every answer she expected to sound greedy didn't. Every opportunity she'd created slipped through her fingers. She took a slow sip of wine, then smiled. "One last time, I suppose," she said casually. "There's only one question left." The room grew still. So many young women today, she looked directly into my eyes, are attracted to successful men. A few guests exchanged uncertain glances. My son has been fortunate. He's worked hard. Our family has been blessed. She placed her glass on the table. Then came the sentence, the one I'd remember for the rest of my life. "I think everyone here deserves honesty." She folded her hands together. "So tell us, Charlotte." Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "If Ethan had been an ordinary man, no family fortune, no successful company, no inheritance, no Walker name, would you still have said yes?" The ballroom became silent, utterly silent. Even the musicians stopped playing. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I looked at Ethan. He looked stunned. Richard slowly lowered his fork. Amanda closed her eyes, almost as if she'd known this moment was coming. I took a slow breath. Then I smiled. Not because I was amused, because I suddenly understood. This dinner had never been a celebration. It had been a trial, and Victoria believed she was the judge. She had no idea. She had just asked the one question. That would begin unraveling everything she thought she knew. The silence was so complete. I could hear the ice melting inside someone's glass. No one moved. No one reached for their food. Even the waiters had stopped walking. 50 people were staring at me, waiting for an answer. Victoria sat perfectly still at the head of the table. Her posture was flawless. Her smile was warm. But her eyes were daring me to fail. She believed there were only two possible answers. If I said yes, she'd call me a liar. If I hesitated, she'd claim I'd revealed the truth. She had built the perfect trap, or so she thought. I looked at Ethan. His face had gone pale. He opened his mouth. "Mom." Victoria gently raised one finger. "I'd like Charlotte to answer." The room remained silent. I slowly stood, not because I wanted to make a speech, because I wanted everyone to hear me clearly. I looked at Victoria first, then around the table. Finally, I smiled. "If Ethan had worked at a gas station." A few guests blinked. "If he'd driven the same old Honda I drive." Someone chuckled softly. "If we'd rented a tiny apartment." I looked toward Ethan. "I would have still fallen in love with the man who spilled coffee all over me." Several guests smiled. "He made me laugh before I knew his last name." Another smile spread across the room. "I didn't even know his family owned a company until months after we started dating." That caused several heads to turn toward Victoria. She didn't move. I continued. "I didn't fall in love with Walker Development." A few people laughed quietly. "I fell in love with the man who drove 3 hours just to buy me terrible blueberry pie." Now the laughter grew louder. "The man who sat beside sick children and read bedtime stories while they waited for surgery. The man who carried groceries for an elderly neighbor every Saturday because she reminded him of his grandmother. The man who cried when our rescue dog had to stay overnight at the veterinarian." I looked at Ethan. "I've never loved his bank account. I've loved his heart." For a moment, the room softened. Several guests nodded. Even Richard smiled proudly. Victoria slowly clapped. One clap, then another. "My," she smiled. "That was beautifully rehearsed." The warmth disappeared from the room. I frowned. "I'm sorry. You speak very well." She tilted her head. "But speeches aren't proof." Knot formed in my stomach. She wasn't finished, not even close. She picked up a small folder from beside her chair, a black leather folder, one I hadn't noticed before. I did a little research. Ethan's head snapped toward her. "Mom," she ignored him. "I simply wanted to understand the woman my son intends to marry." She opened the folder. "You rent an apartment." "Yes." "You still have student loans." "Yes." "You drive a 12-year-old Honda." "Yes." "You've never owned property." "Correct." She looked around the room. "So, how exactly does someone with so much education have so little to show for it?" A few uncomfortable whispers spread through the guests. I noticed Richard's expression change. He wasn't smiling anymore. Neither was Ethan. Victoria continued. I've always believed actions speak louder than words. She folded her hands. My son has access to trust funds, multiple homes, a future worth tens of millions of dollars. She looked directly at me, and yet, you expect us to believe none of that influenced your decision. Someone coughed awkwardly. Another guest looked down at their plate. No one wanted to be there anymore. Ethan finally stood. Enough, his voice echoed across the ballroom. I asked Charlotte to marry me. I love her. That should be enough. Victoria looked at him calmly. Ethan, I'm protecting you. I don't need protection. You don't know that. I know Charlotte. Victoria smiled sadly. You think you do. For the first time all evening, Richard spoke. Victoria, his deep voice carried effortlessly across the room. That's enough. She turned toward her husband. You haven't asked a single question, because this isn't a board meeting. This is our son's engagement. She held his gaze. I'm trying to prevent a mistake. Richard sighed heavily. Or create one. The room became even quieter, apparently. This wasn't the first disagreement they'd had about me. Victoria wasn't ready to lose. Not tonight. She reached into the folder again, this time. She removed several printed photographs. I think everyone deserves context. My heartbeat quickened. Context? What context? She began laying photographs across the table. One showed me leaving the hospital. Another showed me carrying grocery bags. Another showed me getting into my Honda. Another showed me having lunch with an older man. I recognized him immediately. Dr. Harold Simmons. Retired surgeon who had mentored me through residency. He was 72. He'd attended my medical school graduation. Victoria smiled triumphantly. You seem very comfortable around wealthy older men. Several guests gasped. Amanda's fork hit the floor. Ethan stared at the photographs. What is this? Victoria answered calmly. I hired a private investigator. The words slammed into the room. A private investigator. My ears rang. For a second, I wondered if I'd heard her correctly. Richard slowly stood. You did what? I wanted answers. You hired someone to follow Charlotte. I hired someone to verify her intentions. Richard looked horrified. Victoria, have you lost your mind? She looked genuinely confused. I'm protecting our family. No, his voice became firmer. You're humiliating it. I looked at the photographs, then back at Victoria. So, you've been following me? She didn't answer immediately. I've been gathering information. For 2 years. She remained silent. My chest tightened. Every grocery trip, every coffee shop, every walk through the park, someone had been watching, someone I'd never noticed. A strange sadness settled over me. Not anger, sadness, because no one deserves to be treated like a suspect simply for falling in love. I picked up one of the photographs. This man, I smiled faintly, is Dr. Harold Simmons. Victoria waited. He's my mentor. Silence. He performed his first pediatric surgery before I was born. A few guests laughed nervously. He also taught half the surgeons in this city. I gently placed the photo back down, and he's happily married. Several heads turned toward Victoria. Her confident expression flickered. Just for a second, another photograph. It showed me carrying shopping bags into a small brick building. Victoria folded her arms. You visit this address almost every Thursday. Yes. What is it? I smiled. The Ronald McDonald Family House. Several guests recognized the name immediately. I volunteer there. I cook dinner for families whose children are receiving cancer treatment. The silence changed. It no longer belonged to me. It belonged to Victoria, one by one. The photographs she'd believed would destroy me began telling a completely different story. The older man, a legendary surgeon, the building, a children's charity, the grocery bags, food donations, the hospital visits, my job. The old Honda, a personal choice. Every piece of evidence she'd collected. Painted a portrait, just not the portrait she'd expected. I looked around the ballroom. Faces were changing, expressions softened. Whispers spread from table to table. Someone quietly asked, wait, did she say she's a surgeon? Another guest frowned. I thought she was a receptionist. Across the room, Arthur Reynolds slowly lowered his wine glass. His eyes widened. He looked at me with sudden recognition. Then he looked at Richard. His voice was barely above a whisper. Richard, I think your wife has made a very serious mistake. Richard turned toward him. What do you mean? Arthur looked directly at me, then back at the room. I know exactly who Charlotte Bennett is. The ballroom fell silent once again, and for the first time that night, Victoria looked uncertain. Arthur Reynolds slowly pushed his chair back. For years, he'd been one of Richard Walker's closest business associates. He wasn't a dramatic man. He rarely raised his voice. But the expression on his face made everyone pay attention. He looked at me, then at Victoria. Finally, he let out a long sigh. "Victoria, you've been investigating the wrong woman." The room went completely still. Victoria frowned. "I'm sorry." Arthur turned toward Richard. "I can't believe you don't recognize her." Richard looked confused. "Should I?" Arthur nodded. "You absolutely should." He looked back at me. "Dr. Charlotte Bennett." The room seemed to hold its breath. "Chief Pediatric Reconstructive Surgeon." Several people gasped. Arthur continued. "The woman who led the emergency surgery after the school bus accident last winter." Someone at the far end of the table whispered, "Oh, my God." Another guest slowly lowered her fork. "I saw that on the news." Arthur nodded. 23 children. Every one of them survived. The silence grew heavier. Victoria blinked, for the first time all evening. She looked genuinely confused. Richard turned toward me. "Charlotte, you." I smiled gently. "I never hid it." He looked stunned. "I thought you were." "I work at the hospital." I finished the sentence for him. "I've always said that." He searched his memory, every family gathering, every conversation, every interrupted answer. Every time Victoria had changed the subject. Understanding slowly spread across his face. He looked at his wife. "You never let her finish." Victoria shook her head. "No, that can't be right." Arthur looked almost offended. "I've donated to Children's Mercy Hospital for 15 years. I know half the surgical department." He smiled at me. "You operated on my granddaughter." My heart softened. "Emma," he nodded. "She wanted to become a doctor after meeting you." I smiled. "She drew me a picture." Arthur reached into his wallet to everyone's surprise. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, carefully, almost reverently. He unfolded it. It was a crayon drawing, a little girl in blue scrubs holding the hand of a smiling child. Across the top were uneven words written in red crayon. "Thank you, doctor." Charlotte Arthur's voice trembled. "My granddaughter insisted I carry this everywhere." Several guests wiped away tears. Even the waitstaff had stopped pretending not to listen. Victoria stared at the drawing, then at me. Her confidence cracked. "But you..." She couldn't finish the sentence. I understood exactly what she wanted to ask. "Why do you drive that old car? Why don't you wear designer clothes? Why didn't you tell us who you are?" I answered before she could speak. "I don't introduce myself with my job." The guests leaned forward. "Why not?" I smiled. "Because medicine isn't my identity. It's my responsibility." The room was silent. "My patients don't care what handbag I carry. They care whether I can save their child." A mother at the end of the table quietly wiped her eyes. Richard spoke softly. "How long have you been a surgeon?" 12 years. "And you've never mentioned it." I tried. A few people laughed quietly, not because it was funny, because they suddenly realized the truth. Every single time someone had asked, Victoria had interrupted. Amanda slowly stood. Her hands were shaking. "I need to say something." Everyone turned toward her. She looked directly at Victoria. "I knew." Victoria stared. "What?" "I knew Charlotte wasn't pretending." "You what?" Amanda swallowed hard. "I saw her at Children's Mercy Hospital last year." Victoria frowned. "You never told me." "I tried." Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "My little nephew had leukemia." The room became silent again. Charlotte wasn't even assigned to his case. She visited him anyway. She brought him puzzle books. She sat with him after her shift ended because he was afraid to sleep. Amanda looked at me with watery eyes. "He adored you." I remembered him immediately. Little Jacob, 8 years old, missing his front teeth, obsessed with dinosaurs. He'd insisted every T-Rex deserved a birthday party. I smiled through tears. "How is Jacob?" Amanda laughed softly while crying. "He starts 4th grade next month." A wave of relief washed over me. "That's wonderful." Victoria looked at Amanda. "You never told me any of this." Amanda shook her head. "You never asked." Those 4 words landed harder than anyone expected. You never asked. The ballroom had changed. An hour earlier, people had been quietly judging me. Now, they were looking at Victoria, not with anger, with disbelief. How could someone spend 2 years investigating another human being? Without ever asking a single honest question, Richard slowly walked around the table. He stopped beside me for a moment. Neither of us spoke. Then he extended his hand. "I'm sorry." The room watched in silence. "I should have gotten to know you myself." Instead of assuming. I smiled and shook his hand. "Thank you." He surprised everyone. He gently pulled me into a hug, a fatherly hug, the kind that said more than words ever could. When he stepped back, his eyes were red. "You already treat children like family. You deserve to be treated like family here." I blinked quickly, trying to keep my composure. Across the room, Victoria remained seated, motionless for the first time in years. She wasn't controlling the conversation. She wasn't directing the room. She wasn't leading anything. She was simply watching everything she'd built begin to crumble. Still, she wasn't ready to admit she was wrong. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin. Quietly said, "Being a successful surgeon doesn't prove you aren't interested in money." The words echoed through the ballroom. Several guests looked away in disappointment. Richard slowly closed his eyes. "Victoria." "No," she stood. "I've spent years protecting this family. I'm not going to apologize because I asked difficult questions." I looked at her calmly. "You didn't ask difficult questions," she frowned. "You asked the wrong ones." She crossed her arms. "What does that mean?" "It means—" I took a slow breath. "You never once asked me why I became a doctor." Silence. "You never asked about the children. You never asked about my parents. You never asked what makes me happy. You asked about my apartment, my debt, my car, my bank account." I looked around the room. You can learn a lot about a person by the questions they choose to ask. No one spoke, because no one could argue with that, just as it seemed the evening might finally end. The ballroom doors opened. A sharply dressed man hurried inside, carrying a leather briefcase. He looked flustered. "I'm terribly sorry for interrupting." Richard frowned. Daniel was the company's chief legal counsel. He almost never attended family events. He looked from Richard to Victoria. "I came as soon as I got the call." "What call?" Daniel hesitated, then looked at the room. "I'm afraid this can't wait." The smile disappeared from Victoria's face. Richard's expression hardened. "What happened?" Daniel opened the briefcase, removed a thick stack of documents, and quietly said the words that changed everything. "It's about Walker Development, and someone inside the company has been stealing millions." The room froze. For a split second, no one seemed to understand what Daniel had just said. Then Richard slowly stood. "I'm sorry," he frowned. "Did you say someone has been stealing from Walker Development?" Daniel nodded. "I'm afraid so." Cheerful atmosphere that had barely survived the evening vanished completely. Business executives exchanged nervous looks. Several guests quietly pushed their chairs back. Even the musicians stopped pretending to play. Victoria looked irritated. "Daniel, this is hardly the time." Daniel didn't even look at her. "Respectfully, I don't believe we have a choice." Richard motioned toward the library across the hall. "Let's discuss this privately." Daniel hesitated. "I wish we could." Richard frowned. "What does that mean?" Daniel glanced around the ballroom. "Nearly everyone who needs to hear this is already in this room." A chill ran through me. Whatever this was, it was bigger than a bookkeeping error, much bigger. Daniel opened the leather briefcase. He placed several thick folders on the dining table. Financial reports, bank statements, audit summaries. Each one was covered with brightly colored tabs. "I received a call from our external auditors this afternoon. He completed a routine compliance review." Richard folded his arms, and Daniel took a slow breath. "They found payments to 27 consulting companies." Several executives looked puzzled. Daniel continued. "On paper, everything appeared legitimate, but none of the companies have employees." No one spoke. "They don't lease office space. They don't provide services. They don't even have functioning websites." A murmur spread through the room. One executive whispered, "Shell companies." Daniel nodded. "Exactly." Richard's face lost its color. "How much?" Daniel looked down at the report. "Approximately $24 million over 6 years." The words landed like thunder. 24 million. Someone actually dropped a wine glass. It shattered across the marble floor. No one even turned to look. Victoria laughed nervously. "There has to be some mistake." Daniel looked at her calmly. "We hoped there was." "There isn't." He slid one folder across the table. "Our auditors verified every transaction." Richard opened the file. His hands were shaking. "I don't understand." "Neither did we," Daniel nodded, "until we noticed something." He pointed to several pages. "Every fraudulent payment required approval from exactly 2 executives." Richard scanned the documents, his forehead wrinkled. "Who?" Daniel answered quietly. "The chief financial officer." Richard nodded slowly. "And," Daniel swallowed, "and the chair of the family governance committee." Silence, complete silence. Richard slowly looked up. His eyes moved across the room, then stopped on Victoria. She stared back at him. "What?" Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. "You're the chair," Victoria laughed. "Richard, you can't possibly think I'm asking," he interrupted. "Did you approve these transfers?" She looked offended. "Of course I signed documents. I sign dozens every month. I trusted our finance department." Daniel stepped forward. There is something else. No one wanted to hear another sentence, but he continued anyway. Each payment authorization required a handwritten signature. Richard nodded. Yes. Daniel reached into his briefcase, carefully removed several enlarged copies, and laid them across the table. I had our forensic handwriting specialist review them. Every eye followed the papers. One signature belonged to the CFO. The second looked exactly like Victoria's. She stared at the pages, then shook her head. No, those are copies. Daniel nodded. They are. The originals are secured. I didn't authorize fake companies. No one said you knowingly did. Richard looked confused. What are you saying? Daniel answered carefully. We have two possibilities. Either someone forged Mrs. Walker's signature, or someone placed fraudulent documents in front of her to sign. The room breathed again. For one brief moment, hope returned. Maybe Victoria wasn't involved. Maybe she'd simply been careless. Richard looked at his wife. Did you read every document before signing? She didn't answer immediately. Her silence answered for her. Richard closed his eyes. Oh, my God, Victoria defended herself. I trusted Michael. Daniel looked up. The CFO? Yes. He's worked with us for 15 years. I didn't think I needed to question every paper. Daniel nodded. I understand. Then he quietly added, Michael Turner resigned this morning. Richard's head snapped upward. What? He submitted his resignation by email. When? 8 hours ago. And where is he now? Daniel's expression darkened. No one knows. Several executives immediately pulled out their phones. One whispered he knew. Another muttered he ran. The room buzzed with anxious conversations. Through all of it, I stayed silent. This wasn't my company. This wasn't my place. Then Richard looked directly at me. Charlotte, I blinked. Yes, you've barely said a word. I smiled gently. I don't know enough to have an opinion. Daniel suddenly looked at me with curiosity. Actually, I believe you might. I frowned. I'm sorry. Arthur Reynolds smiled. I forgot. Several people looked confused. Arthur laughed softly. Charlotte earned her undergraduate degree in accounting before medical school. A few guests gasped. I smiled awkwardly. It feels like another lifetime. Daniel's eyebrows lifted. You studied forensic accounting, only as part of my finance concentration. Richard stared. You never mentioned that either. I laughed. No one ever asked. Few guests couldn't help smiling. Daniel slid one folder toward me. I know tonight isn't the right setting, but would you mind looking at something? I hesitated. I don't want to intrude. Richard nodded. Please, if you're willing. I slowly opened the file, rows of numbers, vendor payments, approval dates, invoice codes. For a few moments. The ballroom disappeared. There was only the paperwork. I turned several pages, then stopped. Something felt wrong, not the fraudulent companies. Something else. I flipped back 3 pages, then forward 5, then back again. Daniel noticed. What is it? I tapped one invoice. This formatting. What about it? It isn't consistent. Richard frowned. I don't understand. I pointed to the invoice numbers. These were generated by 2 different accounting systems. Daniel leaned closer. His expression changed immediately. Wait, I continued. Someone inserted documents after the monthly reports were finalized. Daniel looked stunned. How can you tell? I smiled faintly. The spacing. Several executives leaned forward. The old accounting software used fixed-width numbering. This invoice uses proportional formatting. It couldn't have been created on the original system. The room became silent. Daniel quickly checked another file, then another. His eyes widened. She's right. He looked at Richard. She's absolutely right. Richard stared at me in disbelief. You figured that out. Less than 5 minutes, I shrugged. I've spent years reviewing surgical records. When something doesn't belong, you notice. Victoria watched the exchange without saying a word. For the first time that evening, she looked at me differently, not as an enemy, not as a gold digger, not even as her future daughter-in-law. She looked at me as someone she had completely failed to understand. But before anyone could speak again, Daniel's phone rang. He answered, listened, then slowly lowered the phone. His face turned pale. Richard immediately knew something was wrong. What is it? Daniel looked around the room. The police just arrested Michael Turner. Several people sighed with relief, but Daniel wasn't finished. They also found something in his home. Richard frowned. What? Daniel looked directly at Victoria. A folder. It contains handwritten notes, detailed plans, and the names of every executive he believed would never question his paperwork. The room fell silent. Daniel swallowed hard. There was one name, written more than any other. He looked at Victoria. Mrs. Walker signs everything. Victoria closed her eyes, and for the first time that night, a single tear rolled down her cheek. No one spoke, not Richard, not Ethan, not the executives, not even Victoria. The words "Mrs. Walker signs everything" seemed to echo through the ballroom long after Daniel had finished speaking. For years. Michael Turner hadn't stolen $24 million because he was a genius. He'd stolen it because everyone trusted him, and because one person signed papers without asking enough questions. Victoria slowly lowered herself back into her chair. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked small, not physically, emotionally. The woman who always had an answer had none. Daniel quietly closed the folder. The police believe Mr. Turner began testing the system with very small payments. Richard looked exhausted. How small? $3,000. And no one noticed. Daniel shook his head. He waited 6 months. Then he increased the amounts. Slowly, carefully. By the time anyone could have noticed, the pattern had become routine. Richard rubbed his forehead. He studied us. Daniel nodded. He studied your habits. He hesitated. And your blind spots. Victoria whispered, I trusted him. No one answered. She repeated herself. I trusted him. This time, Richard gently replied, I know. She looked at him, her eyes red. I thought I was protecting this family. Instead, I made it easier for someone to steal from us. Richard didn't say anything. He simply nodded, because there wasn't anything cruel left to say. The truth had already done enough damage. Then, Victoria slowly turned toward me. Our eyes met. For 3 years. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways. I thought if she ever realized she'd been wrong, she would argue, make excuses, blame someone else instead. Her voice trembled. Charlotte! I waited. She stood. The entire ballroom watched. I owe you an apology. No one breathed. I judged you. Before I knew you. A tear slid down her cheek. I decided who you were, without ever asking who you actually were. The room remained silent. She looked around at the guests. I invited all of you here tonight because I believed I was exposing a liar. She laughed bitterly. The only thing I exposed was my own pride. She turned back to me. When you walked into this family, I saw your car, your apartment, your clothes. I never saw your heart. Another tear fell. I never asked what kind of woman volunteers after 16-hour shifts. I never asked why little children write you thank you letters. I never asked why complete strangers speak your name with respect. Her shoulders shook. I only asked how much money you had. She wiped her eyes. And that says far more about me than it ever did about you. The ballroom was so quiet. You could hear someone crying near the back of the room. I didn't know who it was. Maybe one of the guests. Maybe one of the servers. Maybe Amanda. It didn't matter. Everyone understood that this wasn't really about money anymore. It was about assumptions. Victoria slowly walked toward me. Every step seemed heavier than the last. When she finally stopped in front of me, she reached into her purse. She removed the black leather notebook. The same notebook she'd used to collect information about me without saying a word. She placed it on the table. I wrote everything I thought I knew about you. She opened it. Every page was filled with notes, questions, observations, assumptions. She looked at it for a long moment. Then quietly tore out the first page. Then the second, then another. Soon, paper covered the floor around her feet. I was wrong, she whispered. About all of it. Everyone looked at me, waiting. What would I do? Would I humiliate her? Would I remind her of every cruel comment she'd made? Would I finally get revenge for a brief moment? I remembered every uncomfortable dinner, every sarcastic smile, every question about my finances. Every time she'd looked at me as though I didn't belong, I could have made her feel exactly as she'd made me feel. Instead, I remembered something my father used to tell me. The strongest people don't win by hurting others. They win by refusing to become them. I took a slow breath, then smiled gently. Victoria, she looked up. I'm not angry. She stared at me in disbelief. You should be. Maybe, I shrugged softly. But anger takes up too much space. A few guests smiled through tears. I became a doctor because I believe people deserve second chances. I paused. Sometimes families do too. Victoria covered her mouth. A sob escaped before she could stop it. I'm so sorry. I know. I don't deserve your kindness. I smiled. Maybe not today. A few quiet laughs rippled through the room. But that's the wonderful thing about tomorrow. Without thinking, Victoria stepped forward and hugged me. At first, she hugged me cautiously, as though she expected me to pull away. I didn't. I hugged her back. The ballroom erupted into applause, not loud, not dramatic, gentle, heartfelt. Even Daniel smiled. Arthur wiped his glasses. Amanda cried openly. Richard quietly looked toward the ceiling, blinking away tears. Ethan finally let out the breath he'd been holding all evening. He walked over, pulled both of us into the same hug. I've been dreaming about this. He laughed through watery eyes. Just not like this. Everyone laughed, even Victoria, for the first time. Her laughter sounded genuine. Richard raised his champagne glass. I think we've all learned something tonight. He looked around the room. Companies survive because of audits, he smiled. Families survive because of honesty. Glasses slowly lifted around the ballroom. To honesty, everyone repeated it. To honesty. Crystal touched crystal for the first time that night. The sound felt like celebration, not performance. As guests began talking again, Amanda quietly approached me. I owe you an apology too. You don't. I do, she smiled sadly. I let her convince me that maybe you weren't what you seemed. I laughed softly. I guess neither of us was, she smiled. I'd really like to start over. So would I, she hugged me tightly. The evening finally felt over, or so I thought. As guests prepared to leave, Daniel hurried back into the ballroom. His expression had changed again. He looked directly at Richard. I'm sorry. I know tonight has already been. He searched for the word. Unforgettable. Richard sighed. What now? Daniel held up a sealed envelope. This was recovered from Michael Turner's office. He handed it to Richard. It's addressed to Ethan. The room fell silent again. Richard slowly turned the envelope over across the front, written in black ink. Were 6 chilling words. Read this before the wedding. No one reached for a glass, no one spoke. The applause from only moments earlier vanished as every eye settled on the cream-colored envelope in Richard's hands. The handwriting was neat, careful, deliberate. Across the front were 6 words. Read this before the wedding. Richard looked at Ethan. It's addressed to you. Ethan slowly took the envelope. His fingers trembled. I don't recognize the handwriting. Daniel nodded. Our investigators found it locked inside Michael Turner's desk. There were no other personal letters, only this one. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself. What could he possibly want with Ethan? Daniel answered honestly. We don't know. Ethan looked around the room. I'll read it. I gently touched his arm. You don't have to. He looked at me. If this man stole from my family for years, I want to know why he wrote to me. I nodded. Then I'm with you. He took a deep breath. Carefully broke the seal, unfolded 3 handwritten pages. The room became so quiet. The fireplace crackling in the corner suddenly sounded loud. He began reading. Ethan, if you're reading this, then everything has already fallen apart. I know you'll hate me. You should. I betrayed your father's trust. I betrayed this company, but before history decides who I was, there is something your family deserves to know. Ethan stopped. His voice caught. He looked at Daniel. Did the police verify this is his handwriting? Daniel nodded. They did. Ethan continued. I wasn't able to steal millions because I was clever. I was able to steal because everyone believed titles instead of asking questions. People signed papers they never read. Executives trusted reports they never checked. Employees stayed silent because they assumed someone else was paying attention. Several executives slowly lowered their heads. The words hurt. Because they were true. Ethan turned the page. Your mother isn't a criminal. She's guilty of something far more common. She believed appearances more than evidence. That weakness helped me. I knew exactly which documents she would sign. I knew exactly which questions she would never ask. Victoria quietly cried, not because she was being accused, because every sentence reflected the mistake she'd already admitted. Then Ethan's voice slowed. His eyes moved across the next paragraph. He frowned. What is it? I whispered. He looked at me. Then continued reading. I met Charlotte Bennett only once. She never knew who I was. I blinked. Only once. When, 2 years ago, my grandson was admitted to Children's Mercy Hospital after a bicycle accident. Charlotte treated him like he was her own family. She stayed long after her shift ended. She sat with my daughter while she cried. She bought my grandson a stuffed bear because he'd lost his favorite toy. A lump formed in my throat. I remembered. A little boy named Ben. He refused to let go of my hand before surgery. The bear had cost $12. I'd completely forgotten about it. Ethan continued. She never asked who we were. She never asked how much money we had. She treated the janitor with the same respect she showed the hospital director. That's when I realized something. The room listened in silence. If someone like Charlotte ever joined your family, she would become its greatest strength. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. Mine weren't far behind. He kept reading. I watched from a distance after learning she was dating you. Not because I wanted to hurt her, because I couldn't understand how someone so genuine had ended up surrounded by people obsessed with appearances. Richard slowly closed his eyes. Victoria looked at the floor. Then came the final page. Ethan's voice became almost a whisper. If your mother ever calls Charlotte a gold digger, she'll prove only one thing, that she measured a diamond, but never bothered to measure a heart. A quiet sob escaped somewhere in the ballroom. No one knew who it came from, maybe several people at once. Ethan finished the last paragraph. Money builds buildings. Character builds families. Don't lose the second while protecting the first. Michael Turner's silence, long, heavy. No one moved for nearly a full minute. The man who had betrayed the Walker family had also left them their most important lesson. Richard slowly walked toward the fireplace. He stared into the flames. I spent 40 years building this company. He spoke without turning around. I believed success meant protecting what we'd earned. He smiled sadly. Tonight I realized I nearly lost what mattered most. He turned back toward us. His eyes rested on me, not because of money, because of pride. He walked across the room, stopped in front of me, then did something that shocked every guest. He removed the Walker family signet ring from his right hand. A ring he'd worn for more than 30 years. He held it out. This belonged to my father. I looked at him in confusion. Richard, he smiled, I'm not giving it to you. A few nervous laughs echoed. I'm asking if you'll keep it safe until your wedding. I stared at the ring. I don't understand. He gently closed my fingers around it. Because I trust your judgment more than my own. The room erupted into quiet applause, not because of the ring, because of what it meant. Trust, real trust. Given freely, not earned through wealth, but through character. Victoria stepped beside Richard. She looked at the family signet ring resting in my hand. I spent years trying to decide whether you deserved this family. She smiled through tears. I finally realized. It was this family that needed to deserve you. I couldn't speak. Emotion tightened my throat, so I simply hugged her again. Guests slowly began leaving. Many stopped to shake my hand. Others hugged Ethan. Several thanked Richard for his honesty. Arthur Reynolds smiled as he put on his coat. You know, he chuckled, I came expecting an engagement dinner. What I got was the best leadership seminar I've ever attended. Even Richard laughed. I'll send everyone the minutes. The ballroom filled with genuine laughter, not the polished kind from earlier, the kind that comes after surviving something together. By midnight, only our family remained. The mansion felt strangely peaceful. The chandeliers were dimmed. Half-burned candles flickered softly. Outside, Seattle rain tapped gently against the windows. Ethan took my hand. So, I smiled, so, you still want to marry me? I laughed. After tonight, he winced. Fair point. I stepped closer. I wanted to marry you before tonight. I squeezed his hand. Tonight just reminded me why. He kissed my forehead. I promise you something. What? Our family. He looked toward his parents. Is going to be different from now on. I smiled. I know, but neither of us realized. The greatest surprise wasn't the letter, or the apology, or even the truth about Michael Turner. It was waiting just 6 months away, on the day of our wedding, a day that would prove. Some families aren't born, they're rebuilt. 6 months later, Seattle woke to one of those rare spring mornings that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. The rain had finally taken a day off. The sky was bright blue. Cherry blossoms swayed gently in the breeze. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't wearing scrubs. I wasn't rushing to an operating room. I wasn't checking patient charts. I was standing in front of a mirror, wearing a wedding dress. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from gratitude. My mother adjusted my veil. She stepped back, then immediately started crying. Oh, Mom, she laughed through her tears. I told myself I wasn't going to do this. I failed. We both laughed. My father knocked softly on the door. May I come in? You don't have to ask. He walked inside. The moment he saw me, he froze for several seconds. He couldn't speak. Then he smiled. My little girl. He cleared his throat. When did you grow up? I wrapped my arms around him. I've always been your little girl. He nodded. You always will be. As we drove to the venue, I watched the city pass by. The same coffee shop where Ethan and I had first met. The park where we'd walked our rescue dog. Children laughing in playgrounds. Couples holding hands. Life continued quietly around us. And somehow, it made the day feel even more special. The ceremony was held in the botanical gardens where Ethan had once taken me on a picnic. Nothing extravagant. No gold decorations, no celebrity guests, just flowers, family, friends, and people who had become part of our journey. There were doctors, nurses, construction workers, teachers, neighbors, hospital volunteers, even the mechanic who'd kept my old Honda running for 12 years. When he saw me, he laughed. So, guess I won't be fixing that old car forever. I laughed. Don't be so sure. Near the front row, I noticed a familiar face, Arthur Reynolds. Beside him sat his granddaughter, Emma, the little girl whose crayon drawing her grandfather had carried in his wallet. She waved excitedly. I made you another picture, I laughed. I can't wait to see it. She held up a colorful drawing of Ethan and me standing under a rainbow. Across the top she'd written, "Families grow with love." It wasn't perfect. Some of the letters were backwards. It was perfect anyway. The music began. Everyone stood. My father offered me his arm. Ready, I smiled. I've been ready since the day I spilled coffee on Ethan. Dad laughed. Best accident of your life. The best. As we walked down the aisle, I saw Ethan waiting beneath a canopy of white flowers. He looked exactly the way he had the day he proposed, nervous, hopeful, completely incapable of hiding his emotions. The moment our eyes met, his smile broke into a laugh, then tears. He quickly wiped them away. I practiced not crying, I whispered when I reached him. You failed, he laughed. I know. The ceremony was simple, honest, exactly what we wanted. When the officiant asked if anyone wished to speak, Richard surprised everyone by standing. I wasn't planning to say anything, he smiled. But I think silence has caused enough problems in this family. Soft laughter spread through the guests. He turned toward me. Charlotte. The first time we met, I knew almost nothing about you. I should have changed that. I didn't, he looked at the guests. I spent too many years believing success was measured by buildings, bank accounts, and business headlines. He shook his head. I was wrong. He smiled at me. My future daughter-in-law reminded me that the strongest foundations aren't poured in concrete. They're built with trust. He reached into his pocket, carefully removed the Walker family signet ring. The same ring he'd asked me to keep safe after the engagement dinner. He looked at me. I think it's time. He slipped the ring back onto his own finger, then extended his hand. Welcome to the family. I hugged him tightly. The guests applauded. Then, Victoria slowly stood. She walked toward us carrying a small velvet box. I have something for you. She opened it. Inside were the pearl earrings I'd worn to the engagement dinner. I looked confused. I already own these, she smiled. I know. I had them professionally restored. I laughed softly. They didn't need restoring. They did. She looked into my eyes, not because they were damaged, because every time I saw them, I remembered the worst version of myself. She gently fastened the earrings for me. I'd like them to remind us both of the day our family began telling the truth. Neither of us could stop crying. After the ceremony, the reception felt more like a neighborhood picnic than a formal wedding. Children chased bubbles across the lawn. Doctors laughed with electricians. Lawyers played cornhole against nurses. Richard somehow lost a giant Jenga game to Emma. Twice. Victoria spent nearly an hour talking with my mother about music. Not status, not money, just music, watching them laugh together. I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It changes what the future can become. Later that afternoon, Amanda found me near the garden fountain. She smiled. I brought someone. A little boy peeked out from behind her. He looked familiar. Jacob, he grinned. You remembered. Of course I did. He proudly handed me a small wrapped package. I made this. Inside was a handmade wooden picture frame. The words carved into the bottom made me pause. Thank you for seeing me. I looked at Jacob. You don't know how much this means to me. He shrugged with the complete honesty only children possess. You saw me before anybody else did. I hugged him carefully. Sometimes children understand gratitude better than adults ever will. As evening settled over the gardens, Ethan and I slipped away from the reception for a few quiet minutes. We found a wooden bench overlooking a small lake, the same bench where we'd shared our first picnic years earlier. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, he broke the silence. Do you ever think about that dinner? I smiled. Sometimes. Do you wish it never happened? I looked across the water. A family of ducks drifted peacefully near the shore. Then I shook my head. No, he looked surprised. Really? If it hadn't happened, your mother would have never faced her fears. Your father would have never slowed down long enough to listen. We would have never discovered what was happening in the company. And none of us would have become who we are today. He squeezed my hand. I guess pain can change people. It can, but only if they choose to learn from it. A gentle breeze carried laughter from the reception. Music floated through the evening air. Someone was trying to teach Richard how to dance. It wasn't going well. Emma laughed so hard she almost fell into the grass. Even Victoria was laughing. A real laugh. Not the careful, polished one she'd worn for years. The sound made me smile. A year later, Walker Development established the Charlotte Bennett Children's Hope Foundation, funding surgeries, family housing, and pediatric medical scholarships across Washington. Richard insisted on naming it after me. I argued for weeks. I lost. The foundation's first project wasn't another office tower. It was a children's recovery center beside the hospital. Victoria became one of its most dedicated volunteers. Every Thursday evening, she cooked dinner for families staying there. The same place she'd once dismissed as just another building. She learned every child's name, every parent's story. Sometimes she'd call me after a shift just to ask, "What kind of soup do kids usually like after surgery?" I always smiled before answering. As for my old Honda, I still drove it. The mechanic eventually retired. He framed a photograph of the car on the wall of his shop. Underneath it he wrote, "Still running, just like its owner." People occasionally ask me if this story is really about being called a gold digger. I always smile, because they're asking the wrong question. It was never about the insult. It was about what the insult revealed. One family measured people by wealth. Another measured them by kindness. When those two ways of seeing the world collided, the truth won. Not because truth is loud, but because it doesn't have to pretend. So if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: the people who matter most won't ask what you own before they decide your worth. They'll ask how you treat others when no one is watching. And if they never ask, keep being the kind of person whose character answers for you anyway. Because money can open doors. Reputation can fill a room. But only kindness can make a place feel like home. And in the end, that was the greatest gift I received. Not the wedding, not the ring, not the Walker name. A family that finally learned. The richest person at the table isn't always the one with the most money. Sometimes, she's simply the one with the biggest heart. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment. Tell me about the door that opened for you. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.